People who later studied his crimes all said the same thing. If you passed him on the street, you would never remember his face. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't act strange. And that was the most terrifying part of all, because long before anyone realized what he was doing, he had already turned human fear into a game. And once you were chosen to play, there was no way to quit. It always began the same way. A simple encounter, a small decision that felt harmless at the time. For one victim, it was a late-night bus ride home. For another, it was answering a classified ad online. For someone else, it was agreeing to help a stranger carry boxes into a storage unit. None of them knew that the moment they said yes, they had stepped onto a board where every move was already planned. He believed life was unfairly balanced, that some people existed only to be controlled, tested, and broken. And instead of acting on impulse, he designed rules, challenges, consequences, what he called the game. The rules were simple, at least on the surface. Do exactly what he says, exactly when he says it. Ask no questions. Break a rule, and the punishment wouldn't just affect you, it would affect someone else. That's how he kept them playing. Investigators later learned that his victims weren't chosen randomly. He studied them first. Their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. He knew who lived alone, who wouldn't be immediately missed, who already felt powerless in their daily lives. And once he was confident, he made contact. Sometimes it was a note left on a car windshield, sometimes a message sent from an untraceable number, sometimes a voice on the phone that already knew their name, their address, and what time they usually turned off the lights. The first instruction was never extreme. It was meant to confuse, not frighten. Go to the nearest convenience store and buy a bottle of water. Leave it on the bench outside. That was it. No threat, no explanation, just a strange request paired with a detail that proved he was watching, like describing the exact shoes they were wearing, or the color of their front door. Most people followed the instruction because it felt safer than ignoring it. And when nothing bad happened afterward, they felt relief. That relief didn't last. The second instruction always pushed further. Walk somewhere unfamiliar. Stay awake all night. Turn off your phone for exactly 1 hour. Each task was designed to slowly isolate the victim from help, from logic, from control. And then came the first real punishment. One victim later described missing a deadline by just 5 minutes. She thought maybe the game wasn't real, maybe the messages would stop. Instead, she received a video. It showed the front of her sister's house, filmed in real time. That's when she understood this wasn't about obedience. It was about fear being sharpened slowly, carefully, until it became unbearable. He never rushed. He enjoyed the waiting. He liked knowing his victims were constantly calculating every move, terrified of making a mistake. That anxiety was the point. As the game continued, the instructions became darker. Some victims were told to steal small items. Others were ordered to lie to people they loved. One was instructed to dig a hole in the woods and wait beside it until sunrise. None of them knew why, and that uncertainty was deliberate, because once fear turns into confusion, people stop resisting. What made his crimes especially disturbing was that he rarely appeared in person. He didn't need to. He had cameras, hidden phones, tracking devices slipped into bags or jackets during the first encounter. His victims were never sure when he was watching, so they assumed it was always, and most of the time, they were right. Authorities later found notebooks in his apartment, dozens of them. Each page was dedicated to a different victim, names replaced by numbers, detailed timelines, psychological observation. Notes like, shows hesitation when instructions involve public spaces, or more compliant when consequences involve family. To him, this wasn't violence, it was research. The game usually ended in one of two ways. Either the victim completed a final task that permanently damaged their life, or they tried to escape. Very few succeeded. One man attempted to go to the police. He brought the messages, the videos, everything. Officers listened carefully, took notes, and promised to investigate. That night, the man received a final message. I told you not to involve anyone else. Attached was a live feed from inside the police station's parking lot, focused directly on the man's car. He never contacted authorities again. As weeks turned into months, disappearances began to connect. Different cities, different backgrounds, but the same patterns, the same psychological manipulation, the same silent escalation. What investigators didn't realize yet was that the killer wasn't trying to stay hidden forever. Games, after all, are more satisfying when someone is watching, and soon he would make a move that ensured everyone would finally pay attention. By the time investigators realized they were dealing with a single mind behind multiple disappearances, the damage was already deep. What made the case so difficult wasn't a lack of evidence, it was too much of it, scattered across cities, jurisdictions, and timelines that didn't seem to overlap at first. Different victims, different methods, different endings. But one detail kept surfacing. Every victim had received instructions, and every instruction felt less like a command and more like an invitation. The breakthrough came when a survivor finally broke the pattern. He was a college student who had been pulled into the game after answering a part-time job listing. Simple work, good pay, no interview required. He followed the first few instructions like the others, driven by fear and confusion. But instead of freezing under pressure, he started documenting everything in secret. He wrote down times, saved screenshots, recorded his own reactions, and most importantly, he noticed something others hadn't. The instructions always arrived when he was alone. Never when he was surrounded by people. Never when he was on a crowded street. Never during class. That meant the game master wasn't watching constantly. He was predicting, using routines instead of real-time surveillance. That realization didn't erase the fear, but it gave the student something he hadn't had before. A small window. During one instruction that required him to leave his phone behind, the student broke a rule for the first time on purpose. He borrowed a stranger's phone and sent a single message to a friend. A time, a location, and the words, "If I disappear." When the punishment came, it wasn't immediate, and that delay told him everything. The game relied on psychological control, not instant power. The threats worked because victims believed they were always one step behind. But for the first time, the illusion cracked. The student disappeared 2 days later, but this time, someone noticed right away. Law enforcement began piecing together the notebooks, the messages, the behavioral patterns. They learned that the killer wasn't improvising. He was repeating cycles, refining them, improving efficiency. What finally led them to him wasn't advanced technology or profiling, it was ego. The killer wanted recognition but not exposure. He began leaving subtle signatures, small references hidden inside instructions, phrases reused, word patterns repeated. A specific way of numbering steps. Those patterns led investigators to a private online forum where users discussed psychological experiments and moral decision-making. Buried among theoretical discussions was one account that stood out. A user who spoke about control as art, fear as language, choice as illusion. When confronted digitally by undercover officers, the user didn't deny anything. He corrected them. "You don't understand the rules," he typed. "You're not players." That confidence sealed his fate. When authorities finally arrested him, there was no dramatic chase, no resistance. He answered the door calmly, already dressed, as if he'd been expecting them. Inside his apartment, they found walls covered in diagrams, flowcharts mapping fear responses, timelines tracking compliance rates, and in the center of it all, a simple phrase written over and over again: "Choice reveals character." During interrogation, he explained his philosophy without hesitation. He believed that people only showed their true selves when forced to choose under pressure. His game, he claimed, stripped away social masks. It revealed who would sacrifice rules, relationships, even morality to survive. When asked about the victims who didn't survive, he didn't see them as losses. They refused to play correctly, he said. But the most disturbing revelation came near the end of the investigation. Some victims had completed the game. They survived, and they were never the same. People who once lived ordinary lives now struggled with paranoia, guilt, and the haunting knowledge that they had crossed lines they could never uncross. The game didn't end when the messages stopped. It stayed with them, replaying in their thoughts, reminding them of every choice they made. In court, the killer never showed remorse. He watched the victims testify with fascination, as if still studying them, still measuring reactions. When the verdict was read, he smiled, not because he'd won, but because the game had finally reached an audience big enough to matter. Today, his case is studied not just as a series of crimes, but as a warning, a reminder that the most dangerous traps don't always look like violence. Sometimes they look like choices, like silence, like one small decision that feels easier than saying no. Because once you agree to play, the rules stop being yours. And the most terrifying part? You never know which move will be your last.